Good evening and welcome to We the People's Forum, a Braver Angels event where everyday Americans get time at the podium. The purpose of We the People's Forum is to hear from everyday Americans on the issues of the day. We hear from people of all races, classes, places, and politics, with a particular focus on hearing from working class Americans. So We the People's Forum is brought to you by We the People's Project leadership team here at Braver Angels. To learn more about We the People's Project, you can visit www.braverangels.org/WPP. And you can see all about what we're doing. My name is David Lapp. I'm coming to you from South Lebanon, Ohio, just 30 minutes north of Cincinnati. And I'm the director of the We the People's Project. Our forum tonight is, does one size fit all for addressing homelessness? Our format is that we'll spend the first half of tonight with our four main speakers setting the conversation table. Then during the second half, we'll expand the conversation to include everyone else, all of you out there. And during that second half, we especially want to hear from people who have personal experiences with homelessness, whether you've experienced, you've been unhoused yourself, or you work with people or know people who experience homelessness. We especially want to hear from people during that time. And anyone is also welcome to ask a question of our speakers during that time. So our ground rules for the conversation tonight are the same ground rules that we use for a lot of our Braver Angels workshops, and there's four of them. One, we're here to understand others and to explain our views, not to convince anyone to change their mind. Second, we each speak for ourselves and not try to represent any outside group. Third, let's stick to the spirit of the activities designed for each stage of the meeting. So for example, if the activity is sharing our own personal experiences of the issue or asking a question, that's all we do then, even if it means resisting the urge to expound upon our own opinion. And finally, it's otherwise it's standard stuff we all know: taking turns, not interrupting others, listening to everyone, being respectful, and in other words, bringing our best selves to the conversation. So we have four main speakers before we get to the open discussion time. With our four main speakers, we'll set the conversation table. And they are Kat Anderson. She is a maintenance analyst with the nation's largest ferry system in Western Washington and has been a civil service employee for over 20 years. Catherine experienced homelessness as a young person and beat addiction during that time. Corey Zeck is attending college for health information management and works as a health unit coordinator at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. Before that, she worked at McDonald's for 13 years, a period during which her family experienced homelessness, and she is a member of the We the People's Project leadership team. Cynthia G.H. King was an economist and a financial analyst in the field of affordable housing and economic development for over 20 years. And during that time, she worked for the Department of Housing and Urban Development, nonprofit and for-profit developers, and real estate investment companies. She also has significant expertise in historic preservation, disaster rebuilding, and environmental issues related to development. And finally, Daniel Barth is the director of Safe Organized Spaces Richmond, that's in California, and has been working on the issue of housing and homelessness for more than 30 years. So to our main speakers, welcome to We the People's Forum. To all of you out there, our speakers during the discussion time, welcome to We the People's Forum. To moderate this first part of the conversation, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague from We the People's Project leadership team, Darcy Crosman. So Darcy, over to you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm really pleased to have our speakers with us. I think this is going to be a great conversation. I want to first tell you a little bit about what got me interested in this. I live in a little community. It's a kind of underdeveloped community in El Sobrante, California. It's close to Berkeley and across the bay from San Francisco. But it's as I say, it's really different. It's kind of rural. It's got a lot of open land. It's not really a city. It's an unincorporated area. And we have a lot of people camping out in the open areas and the hillside and the creek. And we are under threat of wildfire on, having people camp lots of times, fires get started. And so the community was really worried about this and decided to tackle the problem by coming together with a common ground workshop that Braver Angels has designed. And we came up with common goals and values and concerns. And we took 4 of those goals to the town hall with our county supervisor there. And the community worked on those goals, presented them to the supervisor. And since then, we've been doing an action group where we've been trying to see what services there are, how to connect people. And we've discovered a lot already about services in our area and the needs. And so I was really excited to learn, what approaches are the best approach in situations, and the situations vary. But so there's housing first is a really popular approach where the first thing that people get is a house, regardless of their other needs. And the other needs might be losing a job, being runaway, not being able to get a job, being addicted. I mean, there's many different reasons why people are homeless. And, one of the things we're interested in is well, how do all these needs get addressed? And housing first is something I'm somewhat aware of. And so that's how we got started on this. And I'm interested in hearing the perspective of the people on, that are our speakers tonight. And but before they go into their perspective on this, what are the best approaches? I want to hear their personal and professional experiences that help to shape their points of view. So I want to ask Corey if she would go first and talking about her experiences.
Thank you, Darcy. Well, for those of you who know me, my name is Corey. I'm from Middletown, Ohio. I am married, mother of 3, currently in college, as David said. And my family and I are, in all technicalities, currently experiencing being homeless. The 5 of us live in a small little 2-bedroom, 1 house that used to be an apartment. I mean, technically it is. It's got everything we would need, washer, hookup, kitchen, all of that. But the owner of the property runs it as if it is an extended stay hotel. So we pay our rent by the week. And this is not the first time my family and I have gone through this. My husband has had his job for 8 years, and within the first couple of years, I think it was 2016, somewhere around there. My oldest was really young at that time. That was our first time ever experiencing homelessness. We were living with my dad at the time. He got evicted and could not take us to the place, which is actually the place he currently lives in now. So we had no choice, and we lived in a hotel, all of us in a small hotel room, paying our rent for the hotel room by the week, same as we do now. And at that time, we looked into all the resources in our area. And in our area, there's a network called Interfaith Hospitality Network, and that is who we dealt with during that first bout of homelessness. And we were told while we were going through all of this, doing paperwork and all of that, my husband had the job that he currently has. And we were told that because we were technically homeless, that we did not have an address, that legally in the eyes of the government, we are considered a homeless family. So that the income portion of most of these services would not come into play because of our status. So we go through the whole process, fill out all the paperwork. I'm the one doing all the interviews and all the meetings that you have to do to get these services. And at the very end of it, when we were ready to finish the process, get housing and all of that, the person who interviewed me said that my husband made too much at his job for us to qualify, even though we were told at the beginning of all of it that the income portion of this would not come into play because of our status. So we spent, I think it was 6 months in a hotel until we finally found a place, and we're able to, through family and the help of family and friends, get a deposit down on that place. But it was already owned by a slumlord. Let's just, without going into details, it was not the best place. It looked like it was going to be great, and it was for a while. And then some things happened, and we just, lack of better term, we ended up getting evicted from that place, even though we had a month-to-month lease, and I could go into a whole story on that, but I won't. We got evicted again. And we got evicted, and then we lived with my dad for a couple of years. And then we got into metropolitan HUD housing. And then we lived there. I think we were there for 2 years. And when you're in HUD housing, a lot of time they come in and they do inspections every so often. And, you know, they expect you to keep your house clean, but also, now this is just my personal opinion. My personal opinion is they are too nitpicky about the things, like generally keeping your house clean. Yes, that's fine. But the inspections they would come in and do for cleanliness for, like, in my personal opinion, way too nitpicky. But it was because of those inspections and things that we missed that we had either thought we did or didn't do correctly or whatever. Due to that, we lost our metropolitan housing, and we've been where we currently are ever since. And it's been just over 3 years now that we've been doing this, and we've made it work. But the services in our area, they're all income based. And so a lot of times we don't qualify for anything. We cannot get food stamps. We cannot get Medicaid. We cannot get housing. We cannot get any of that because we make too much money, because the poverty the guideline that they have, you have to make like next to nothing in order to, this is in the state of Ohio. I don't know what it's like in other states, but in Ohio, the poverty guidelines, you have to make next to nothing in order to qualify for any of these services. So the housing first approach, it would really help a family like mine who is kind of stuck in a not so great situation. You know, that would help us be able to get out of the bad situation we're in, and also be able to give us access to services like financial services that we might be able to get. And a lot of times I haven't been able to find any like free government services that educate people in finances. Most of those services you have to pay for. And of course, we can't afford that. I'm just getting back to work after being a stay-at-home mom for close to 5 years. So it's really a touchy subject with me, because I feel like housing first would be a good approach for that. And it would help a family like mine who we just tried to buy a house and were denied after 2 months of putting in work and paying off everything that they asked us. And we were still met with a denial. So we're kind of stuck in a really bad situation. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to get emotional, but this is how it is for us.
Yeah.
And I would be remiss to say if I'm not blaming others for our situation. I know a lot of people tend to say, well, people who are homeless will blame others for their current situation. We know what got us here. We know. Some of it had to do with things out of our control, and other things were in our control, and we just made poor choices, and it happens. We're people, we make mistakes. You know what I mean? So an approach like housing first, like giving people who are homeless, because this doesn't count. I'm still technically homeless. I might have an address, but this is not a home. This is not a place where you're supposed to be for more than a few weeks at a time. You know what I mean? It's not ideal. I'll just say that.
Corey, thanks so much. I mean, it's not something that I've heard a lot about, you know, that can happen, that you can kind of get stuck like that. So
Yep.
I appreciate, hearing from you, and that it is hard. Kat, would you like to share your experience?
Absolutely, Darcy. Thank you. I'm Kat, and I live in Suquamish, Washington, and was actually born and raised just across the mountain from Rita in a little town called Grayville, Wyoming. So, hi. I have been homeless. Life is good for me now, but and I want to thank Corey so much for her sharing with us what it's like today. It's been about 20 years since I had my experience. A little background, living in a generational low-income community neighborhood. And a lot of people who had, the generational poverty, it was the people who knew how to fill out the forms, knew what to do, knew how to take benefits they received and in less legal ways.
Hey, Kat,
So
sorry to
that was
interrupt
the
you.
environment I was in.
Kat?
I was a single mother.
Kat, we're going to ask you to go ahead and turn off your video because it's coming across choppy. So go ahead and turn off your video, and I think that will help in terms of the audio quality.
All right, there we go. Sorry about that, gang. So again, just kind of living in a it was dangerous and scary a lot of the times. And I was fully engaged in the community, and I was doing some of those illegal things to try to, maximize benefits. I started a new job. I doubled my income, and because I had done that, I lost all my benefits, which at the end of the day left me $100 less than what I had to pay for my bills. So needless to say, I resorted to some of those illegal activities. Mind you, I was a daily meth user at the time. I'm also an alcoholic, and so not only being surrounded by all of that, and then I had my own demons I was fighting. I reached out to my school, my children's school, and I said, I'm a daily meth user, I need help. And which of course turns out, well, not anyway, that's just a little background, just because I want you to kind of understand where my mind was. It was not in a healthy place. It was not in a good place. And I literally had nowhere to go. I had no one to turn to. Was at the time was I was never going to get out of that community in that area, and I left. I live across the Puget Sound from West Side, and I left, and because I knew certain kind of characters, everybody always said that Seattle was where you go if you don't have a home. They had a lot of resources, a lot of services, and that's absolutely true. I was very, I'm going to give credit to God. I put some angels in my life. There was a gentleman who said, hey, you need to go get an ID, and took me to get that ID. So I had basically a form of ID that was supported by a local organization and also recognized by folks like the police and some of the other, food banks and services like that, because I literally walked away from everything. Desperation.
Mm-hmm.
How desperate, definitely desperate that I was. So, very sad point in my life. Very scary. It's extremely scary when you're out there on the streets and the place that you're going to lay your head at night is nobody knows where. Again, I came across people who must have seen something in my face, taught me how to gather cardboard, protect my body heat from the concrete. Knew where, again, I got myself into a community where people knew how to play the game, knew where there were covered openings in buildings so that I could get in out of the rain in Seattle. And mind you, this is October, so it gets real cold real fast, and it's wet constantly. Where to get food, where to get, there were some shelters. Those shelters would air, but you had to get out at 7:00 in the morning. And when it's 30 degrees, 35 degrees out, that's a bad deal. And, I've said before, it's all about surviving. There is nothing else but food, shelter, clothing. How do I stay dry? Where am I going to sleep tonight? How am I going to eat? Where am I going to go to the bathroom? How do I wash my hands? We just went through COVID. Now we all know how to wash our hands, but when you're out there in survival mode, and it really is that fight, flight, fawn, survival life, it's very hard. And I think Corey just shared a beautiful story about how exactly hard it is to get services, even when you're well and healthy and motivated, and we haven't done enough. We haven't done enough. And it's been, again, 20 years since I was homeless. And back to our topic of, is there a one size fits all? Not at all. So if you had bacon and eggs for breakfast, grand. If you had French toast for breakfast, raise your hand. About oatmeal. I'm not going to use coffee because that's not fair. Okay. So in this group of wonderful, amazing people today, we have not even had the same breakfast. Do you guys get what I'm saying there? There can't possibly be a one size fits all solution because we're all different down to what we think, how we feel every moment, our DNA, our fingerprints.
So Kat, I really appreciate your perspective on this. And I'm going to ask you a little bit more about your approach, but I need to get to a couple of other speakers before we go into further what you think will be most helpful. I'd like to hear from Cynthia. I'd love to hear your perspective and your experience.
I just have a couple minutes more, Darcy, if that's okay. Or am I over?
Well, we're kind of running low on time, and I have a couple other questions. I will get back to you though.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, thank you.
Cynthia, you're muted.
My name is Cynthia King, and Kat and Corey, I'm so sorry for all that you've gone through. And I will tell you that for a lot of affordable housing, companies have to compete for financing, and they don't compete on price, they compete on other things. And one of the things they compete on is how poor are you going to focus your finance, your project on. So even though technically the rule might say, well, we'll take people at 60% or 80% of median, which, usually between 60 and 80% of median, most people could buy a small house. So that's pretty high. But when that particular builder competed for money, in order to win the funds to build a project, they may have had to promise that in reality, they were going to limit their tenants to 30% of median, which is very, very poor. So sometimes people will say, oh, these are the rules, but in fact, it doesn't really matter that the rules would have been more generous, because the way the system is set up, they have to compete on something, and they can't compete on price, so they compete on things like that. The level of poverty is something that their tenants will be. And that might explain why it seems like you're not eligible for anything. My purpose here is mostly to add knowledge about how and where for people to make a decision, not necessarily to advocate for anything. My experience, as David said, is affordable housing. I've worked on hundreds of projects, including transitional housing for the homeless. I'm an economist, and I've arranged financing from banks, government, investors. I've inspected construction for safety issues and environmental issues and historic preservation. And I spent a lot of time listening to managers of affordable housing. I would arrange service plans and recruit service providers who were going to provide services to the people who were eventually going to be in the housing to meet their needs. And I've also been a landlord for a few years, not intentionally, it just sort of happened. And so I did it for a few years. From my experience, this is what I know. Affordable housing costs more to build, manage, and maintain than private market rate housing every year it exists. There's no date when it's paid off and makes a profit. So there's no time you can say, well, as soon as we get it up and running, it'll be cash flowing and then there'll be money to pay for, extra services or improvements. It just, the financing is not designed for that. Significantly rehabilitating an old building costs nearly as much and often more than building a new one. And that's particularly true if it's historic, which is defined as every building over 50 years old. Sometimes people think they can save money in certain ways, and you can't really save money by getting an old building unless you're not going to fix it up. I can explain why those things are true, but I don't want to distract from the rest. From my own experience, a tenant who brings in a relative contrary to the lease, and that person had bed bugs, and they don't tell the landlord because they don't want to, that's against their lease. And by the time you find out, which you found out because they migrated into their neighbors' units, the cost of cleanup will be more than the entire rent for that unit for a year, over $10,000. So it's not just, well, the landlord won't make any money. They won't have any money to pay for the mortgage or taxes. And if you're not the landlord, if you're a nonprofit that owns it, it's the same. I've had a number of people say that financially they'd be better off if they didn't collect rent, but none of these bad things happen. And of course, everybody doesn't do these things, but a few do. Another thing I know is that the landlord, and again, that includes nonprofit, whoever it is that has to run and manage, cannot be the same person as the social worker. The first time I heard about this was, and came to understand it, was Catholic social services in a certain area owned a lot of affordable housing, and they had nuns running it. And they had to go hire a professional manager so that the person who is enforcing the rules is not the same as the person who is counseling the tenants about how to follow the rules or whatever other benefits they need.
And what's your perspective on that, Cynthia? How do you feel about that?
Oh, that's what I believe, that you cannot You cannot have the same human being be the counselor and the person who manages and keeps the place going, taking
Mhm.
care of the building and making sure it's going to be there and the bills are paid. It's not the same as being a counselor for the tenants. It just cannot be the same person. It's a separate concept. And the other thing that I know, I remember once talking with a social worker that was supposed to be helping me write a social work plan for service providers. And like I said, we always, or almost always, most of the projects I've worked on, not including homeless, but just affordable housing in general, there was a service plan. You know, what are we going to do to make life a little easier? In some places, there are bookmobiles. We go find the bookmobile and make sure their stop was here. Or, well, there are a lot of things like that. But in terms of having classes or whatever and a room to put them in or have them be put in. And anyway, one of the things I know is that you cannot simply rely on the service providers. Of course, you need them. But within any group, including homeless people, there are people who know stuff, people who are currently unhoused. There are people who know stuff and they can be helpful. And that is beneficial in the fact that there are going to be people that the social workers, and I don't mean to be negative, but the social worker might think of as a client, especially if they're very young, and that all the knowledge is going from the service provider and the people who do the building and counsel them to these sort of empty vessels of knowledge, when in fact, these people know a lot of stuff and they could help each other. And they might know stuff that the service provider doesn't know, how to get around things and how to fix things. And allowing them to do that and seeing them not simply as, you know, recipients empowers them. So I just think that's a terribly important part of it. And that's almost everything I know.
That I'm really super interested in that part of it. And I will get back to you, but I need to hear from Daniel now.
Hi there.
Hi, Daniel.
I'm Daniel Barth. I'm in Richmond, just a couple miles away from where Darcy is. And so Richmond, California is part of the San Francisco Bay Area. We're in the East Bay. So the fancy part is San Francisco, of course. And the large part is San Jose in the south. And then on the east side, there's a number of cities. There's Berkeley, Oakland, and Richmond historically has been a very poor, very impoverished and segregated city. So when we're talking about homelessness and one size, which I agree with Kat, is just, there's no such thing. You know, what size shoes do you wear? Okay, we'll go down that route. Everyone has their needs. But it comes from a historical context. If generation after generation after generation, we have been given or provided the least amount of opportunity possible, of course, we're going to have a segment of our population, 1%, 2%, something like that, who are homeless. And of course, 35, 40% who are very, very, very low income and struggling. And so can you imagine the challenges that we have as a society? And of course, we all know when we have so many people who are poorly outfitted to survive in this society and are given least of the resources, from schooling to the access to housing and food and healthcare and so forth, and then to be in the worst environments usually, because there's an environmental racism that goes on in these situations. Richmond, by no accident, is just east of the west winds from Chevron. And so, of course, environmental racism is what has put folks in the environments in which we live. And we know this all over our country, that we have poor folks and then the other side of the tracks, or we are on the other side of the tracks as poor folks. So what do you do in a situation like that? And I really enjoyed what Cynthia said there, is that, give people some credit, right? The best survivors in the house are those without. They know how to take care of themselves, even if it doesn't look healthy to you or to me. It is the best that they have given the circumstances. So what do you do to change those circumstances? Well, for 26 years, I ran homeless shelters. So let's talk about that as an institution. What are homeless shelters good for? Homeless shelters are good for getting folks off the street in a crisis situation. Of course, homelessness is a crisis. It's a public health crisis. It's a housing crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis, but it is not, it is not we should not stigmatize folks and say and call them homeless and relegate. What we can do is recognize that the resources that we have, right? We talk about homeless shelter and we talk about housing first. And what is in between that? Homeless shelters are good for 3-4 months, sometimes on a night-to-night basis. In the most empowering shelter that I could develop, it was still something that would end after 6 or 8 months. And how many people in your life do you know can change their lives around in 5 or 6 or 7 months? No, it takes time. Folks are coming out of a mental institution sometimes. I was running a program where a good percentage were coming out of the county psychiatric ward, right? Some were coming out of prison or jail. And we were coming in to rebuild lives in acute crisis. No other place to go. That's where folks go when they have no other resource, is a homeless shelter. But we're talking about folks, generally speaking, who are chronically homeless because they have chronically been under-resourced. And the resources that folks need, what do we think we need? Well, we need opportunities. What kind of opportunities? Employment opportunities. So when I saw, and I left the homeless shelter scene after, like Cynthia, building transitional houses and homeless shelters and running them and creating a system of care, I recognized that it was not sufficient, especially in our county. Our county, Contra Costa County, is exceptionally poor and relatively conservative in the San Francisco Bay Area. So resources for those who with the least are given very begrudgingly, let's say, or we are just under-resourced. We're not a city that has big industry or big tourism and all of that. So we don't have the ability to do this housing first approach. You provide housing and then bring resources. We don't have the resources, we don't have the housing, nothing that folks can really afford. And like I was saying, they don't have the opportunities, the jobs. So as I came from the homeless environment, the homeless shelter environment into Richmond, I recognized that encampments were increasingly coming to be the way that where people had to survive. And where folks are in homeless encampments, they're on freeway off ramps, they're on the train tracks, feet from the train. I have one friend of mine who his arm is cut off right there. He was lucky he isn't one of the ones who usually dies when hit by a train. We have folks in the parks. We have folks on the creeks. We have folks on the streets. And those are where folks are relegated because we as a society try to move folks out of our neighborhoods and into the corners where folks could be most easily relegated. And so what can we do to change that situation is provide jobs. And one of the most important things that we could do is clean up trash. Homeless encampments don't have a trash service, right? And folks come and live there and then they're abated, meaning they're removed forcibly, and folks and stuff is usually left there so that other people won't come. But folks continue to come to the only places where they are allowed to be. And so trash is a common problem. And it's usually also the place where illegal dumping happens. Illegal dumping happens in the relegated in the corners where folks aren't looking. They don't want to pay for the dumping fees, and so they throw their trash down. So what we created was a streets team. So this little organization called Safe Organized Spaces was born 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And it started with a streets team. And then we recognized that one of the most important things that we needed, especially during COVID, was mobile showers. There was not a public shower anywhere. All the public service agencies were closed for indoor service. So there was no outdoor showers. So we created a mobile shower program. All of this
Daniel,
through donations.
I love your story, but I
Yes.
am running out of time. What
Good.
I'm going to do is do a last round with everyone to
Okay.
just talk about, so what kind of support is most helpful? Why? What do you do with people who are having problems with drugs? I'll start with you. Give you a
Okay.
couple minutes.
Sure. So every single person that I work with has a substance abuse issue, right? We're living on the streets. We're struggling with survival. So having a job begins the process of change. We cannot expect change to happen when there's no other new ingredients. So having a job, allowing folks to transition their lives gradually is one of the first steps that one can take.
Okay. Corey, what do you think would have been, or what is most helpful for you right now?
Any way to get out of here. Any way that my family and I can get out of here would be helpful. The problem with that is we are not in what most would consider to be a dire situation. I refuse to go to a homeless shelter because, you know, I have 3 kids and that's just trauma that I'm not willing to put them through. And some people have criticized me for that choice, but I'm fine with that. It's just trauma I refuse to put them through. But access to services would be nice. Like if I could get food stamps for my family, even if it's just a month, 2 months, even like, you know, on a week-to-week basis, you know, that would help. If I could go and find a place where if I could get a house for my family, even if it's just transitional until we're able to find somewhere else to go, that would be helpful. Because then at least it would give me time to organize my finances and get whatever, even if they required education. Like I know, say here, we'll put you in a house. In order to stay here, you have to go through these financial education classes, learn how to save money. Because I was never taught that. So give me a house and then tell me what you need me to do to stay there. Like that would be the most helpful thing. You know, or if I could find somebody who's willing to do like a rent to own option where I could move into the house, rent it from them. And I know it is possible, but like, it's just any way to get out of here where I don't have to worry constantly week to week if I'm going to have a place to live or not. That would be the cool thing.
Yeah. It seems like it seems like somebody, you know, helping you figure that out would be very, very helpful. Thank you. Corey. And Kat, I'm back to you.
Thank you, Darcy. You know, the work that Daniel's doing is amazing, and Cynthia's perspective, absolutely. Thank you. I think we don't sometimes understand what's available and how it's measured and that. So I'm going to wholeheartedly agree with Daniel's suggestion of jobs. During my homeless experience in the camp I was in, I was given the job to go get food because that was something I could do at that point that helped the little homeless community, mind you, of about 7-8 people that benefited the whole. And I think when we you know, we mentioned addiction, we've got to let the subject matter experts take care of those subjects. We've got to build a more open gate to that kind of thing more awareness. I have a friend who actually goes out and takes food to homeless folks and socks and talks to them directly about recovery. And he does this with a great community support. Food, shelter, clothing, we can progress into some of the actual healing depending on the individual.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And Cynthia, just a couple of minutes for you before I turn it back to David. What do you think would be most helpful?
I am a general believer that for most people, if they had a better education and the opportunity to get a job and keep one and have stability and health, they'd take care of their own housing. Even though I spent most of my career in it, I would tend to think that, well, there are some people who are going to need transitional housing or sort of emergency safety net housing. As a general rule, if we did a better job of keeping people healthy, educating them and giving them opportunities, they could get that cheaper market rate housing, because it really is. A lot of people think that if you see an expensive complex and it has a swimming pool, well, if we just got rid of that swimming pool, it would be way cheaper, but it doesn't really work that way. And so we spend an awful lot of money on housing that for in situations where if we had helped the people in other ways before, then they would not have needed so much of our help to build an entire industry of very expensive, difficult to manage giant housing projects. So,
Okay, well, thank you.
but I have a question for Mr. Barth. If 6 months isn't long enough for transitional housing, how long is? Would a year do it? Is there if we did just a little longer, would it make a difference? Would that be enough for people to sort of become settled in their lives?
Daniel, are you here?
I think Daniel had to switch.
Yeah.
He had to. Oh, there he is. Okay,
I'm
go ahead,
here.
Daniel.
Yeah, sorry, I was I had to hit star 6. So yes, so when you're dealing with an individual who hasn't had a legitimate job in their 52 years of life, and they have their first job, and they start to raise money, they start to make money, and they're changing an addictive pattern and dealing with the other trauma that one deals with when chronically homeless, then what we should expect is that, if it takes us 6, 8, 10 months to find a new job, which it takes most of us, many of us, and to change significant life situations, then certainly it's going to take months to years to get to that place. And so folks who come to our work, and they're getting $18 an hour, which is not much in the Bay Area standards, but is a decent amount of money. And they're working from, let's say they start to get 10 hours, 20 hours, now 30 hours a week, some of them full time. Now we start to see folks being able to get a shared house or a room in a house or their own apartment. And so, but that takes the changing of the mindset, the changing of the pattern of living, the being able to accept that I can deserve something better. And then we see folks being able to obtain and hopefully then sustain housing. So that is on the order of a year plus, my opinion.
Okay, thanks so much, Daniel. And I am going to turn it over to David.
All right, excellent. Now we want to invite all of you to enter this conversation. So we'll expand this conversation here. So what we're doing here is we're inviting you to, particularly people who have if you have direct experience with homelessness, whether you've experienced it yourself or you work with people who have experienced it, or maybe you've been a landlord and have had that experience, we want to hear from you. So raise your hand, take up to 3 minutes to share your experience. And I want to invite you also, perhaps you have a perspective on, based on your experience, of what you think is most helpful or helpful in addressing homelessness. So, and if you do have a perspective on what is helpful, if you could couch it first in terms of your own experience, give us a sense of where you're coming from so that we can know where your perspective is coming from. Anyone is also welcome to ask a question of our speakers, and you'll have 3 minutes for those of you who want to share your experience, 3 minutes. And then if you want to ask a question, you can ask in about 30 seconds. If you're asking a question, some good elements of a good question of understanding is it's not a gotcha question. You want to learn something about someone else, something you're curious about, versus wanting the other person to learn from your question. So make it actually a question. So, all right, let's go to you all, and let's go to you first, Nora. Go ahead. And do you have an experience you want to share, or do you have a question?
Hi, I'm Nora. I have an experience. So I'm a housing first coordinator. I work in Boston, Massachusetts. I wanted the issue of substance abuse was addressed. And I just wanted to say that I myself have struggled with addiction. I'm sober now. I also have a master's degree. Both my parents have master's degrees, and I don't have housing instability. So I just wanted to make the point there that we can easily distill down homelessness to people's individual choices and say that, oh, it's because of addiction. Well, guess what? There's a large percentage, it's not large, it's about 10% of the population that struggles with addiction. And if you have other protective factors like good education, parents with good education, stability in all these other ways, and job security, you may not find yourself homeless. So I wanted to state that we shouldn't distill it down to certain like moral choices. Secondly, the Boston area is absolutely in crisis with the prices of housing. I really appreciated hearing from Cynthia, who obviously has extensive property management and financing of affordable housing projects. And what she said to us all is, it is not financially viable to create these affordable housing developments. So we have that. That's a real problem. And on the other hand, we have growing number of people who are homeless and without housing. So that's also a growing issue. And so I guess what I appreciate is hearing from both sides, because we need a solution that doesn't ignore one or the other. We don't want to ignore people who are like, we're dumping money into housing and we never get it back and it's gone. And we don't want to ignore people who are experiencing homelessness and the crisis that is for each individual human, if you believe in the value of every human life. So thank you very much, and hope everyone has a great night.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you for sharing your experience and a little bit of your perspective. Let's go to Michael. Michael, do you have an experience you want to share, or do you have a question? Go ahead and unmute yourself, Michael.
There we go. This has been powerful. I'm an elected official, small town, and I have had experience in working with people on the street. But the thing that I keep hearing or seem to hear, and that I certainly deal with, is the bureaucracy. We have a lot of programs in varying degrees that are supposed to help people, but it appears that we spend more money on the people running the program than we do on giving people a hand up. And that's a concept that I haven't really heard too much about as a society. How can we decide what's a hand up versus just a handout? But the biggest question I'd like to ask anybody who wants to deal with it is, how do we change the money that is being spent just to run a system? Thank you.
So the question is, how do you change say that question again, Michael?
Yeah, does anybody have any thoughts on how we can begin to change a system that costs more to keep the people working that run the system than actually help the people that the system is supposed to be helping?
Does one of our speakers want to address that? Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sure.
Go
This
for
is
it, Daniel.
So, I appreciate you talking about institutional systems, and it's my hope and desire that we can change systems, but it first comes to supporting the change, the personal development of an individual, then in the local neighborhood, because all of these are local issues, very local issues, and then the institutional changes at let's call it the bureaucratic level. And I would say the number one hope that I have is that we evolve from expecting a system of care to provide that to evolving a community of care where we find the means so that neighbors, unhoused and housed, who live together, some live in the streets and some live in their houses, to somehow find a way to support each other. That means we need to have our unhoused neighbors being good neighbors, right? And not contributing to the decline of a neighborhood, but to uplifting a neighborhood. And in exchange, and what people hopefully recognize, is that by providing local resources, meaning their support, their time, their dollars, their materials, that we can then, and most of all, their acceptance for remedies, because this is the number one problem that we have, and that Cynthia always probably has seen, is that not in my backyard is exactly the sentiment that people have for your neighbors who came from your neighborhood and maybe lived in your house at one time. And so can we then evolve a community of care where we can allow, perhaps tolerate, that we have those with less means and may not seem like us to be living in our neighborhoods because it's their neighborhoods as well. So changing the fabric of our society means evolving a different relationship with those who are struggling.
Thank you, Daniel. And thank you, Michael, for your comment and your question. Shirley, do you have a question or do you have an experience you want to share?
An experience that I want to share. So I live on Long Island in New York. I'm currently a student at Stony Brook University studying for a master's in social work. And I'm sorry, I didn't realize my mic wasn't down. I actually have an experience that here in our county campgrounds, we have, during the winter months, approximately 70 families who live in the campgrounds all year long. That number goes up to probably about 100, 150 in the summertime when they're able to camp in tents. We do have an organization here on the island who just published a number in the paper of approximately 3,192 homeless people between Nassau and Suffolk County. That number is incorrect. That would only be those who are unsheltered. And I believe that number was from a census done back in 2019. In our area, we have absolutely no HUD housing. There are no Section 8 vouchers available. In fact, there are no waiting lists. The waiting lists at this point are 3 to 5 years long. So they've actually closed it because they feel like they will never at this point be able to get through that list at this point. An average apartment, 1-bedroom apartment right now, looking on Facebook Marketplace, looking, through brokerages, is $1,900 plus utilities, when minimum wage on Long Island is $15 an hour, and that's what most people are making. And our legislators here, in plain English, couldn't give a crap. We actually brought it to the attention of our county's legislator that one of his employees lives in the campgrounds with his 2 children. He ended up homeless because both of his girls have medical issues, and the medical costs were so much they could no longer keep their house, and they ended up moving into the campground. So I think Housing First is on Long Island, at least, would be huge. We have so many shopping centers and empty plots of land that this housing could be built on. Meanwhile, they just ripped out, several acres of woods in an area to build a 55 and over community where the rents will probably start at $2,300 a month.
And
So-
Shirley, take about 10 more seconds.
Okay, so they're supporting those type of things in our area, but not affordable housing.
Mm.
It's a huge issue and something we've been fighting about for years.
Shirley, thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience. And I see a couple of people whose hands I recognize. I want to come to you, hopefully, Richard, Rita, and Annette, but I see a couple hands that I don't recognize, so I want to make sure to include their voices in this conversation. Stacy Reedinger, I think your name is. Do you have a question or do you have an experience you'd like to share?
Hi, I have an experience I'd like to share. My name's Stacy Ridinger. I live here in San Diego, California, as most of you know, has one of the most unaffordable housing situations and very large level of homelessness here in the area. I just wanted to share some experiences that I've had. This is all previous to living here in San Diego. I have a family member that, unfortunately, due to some family issues, her mother passed away early. She ended up being addicted to heroin. And I was on active duty in the military. I took her in. She lived with us. She ended up becoming more independent, marrying someone, dropped back into addiction, lost her son. We continued to provide monetary support to her over and over again. She went in and out of issues mentally with being able to have stable mental health, to be able to hold jobs in and out of jobs. And, most of the family over time just kind of cut her off. And I'm sharing this because I really feel that if I wanted to offer, if there's help that we could have just in this area, and I have one other point to make, I'd say is that if I feel that, like, even to this day, her and I are pretty distant. I hear from another family member how she's in and out of living in hotels and addiction. We need better education on how to work with people. Like, I just got some trauma-informed training recently. I'm a board member with a nonprofit out here. But before that, I knew nothing as a family member how to work with her. And I really feel like family and friends, I see a lot of our veterans getting help with veteran nonprofits, helping them to connect with people in their families or their communities that can bring them back into the fold and maybe re-nourish those lost relationships. But I'd really love to see some solutions in that area. The other things I quickly wanted to mention is that I've also been the landlord. I've had people rent from me, squat in the home, not pay the rent. They were Section 8. We were very caring and trying to work through it, but we had to evict them. And this is all previous to me working with those that are experiencing homelessness. And I feel very guilty about doing it. But at the same time, it was a rough situation. And I'm not sure what that person with her children ended up doing after that. I'd go through the court system to get them out of the house. I really am a compassionate person, but I wanted to share that other side of it. There's always a point where I can be financially, I could become unstable if my renters aren't paying that. And we were being very, very fair, below market on what they're paying. So what can we do there? We need to educate people about Section 8, because I tell you what, since that one time, I've never accepted a Section 8 opportunity. People have contacted me to rent, and I won't do it. And that's something I don't want to do anymore. I'd like to offer that up. So
yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Stacy, I'm really resonating just as a layperson myself on this, who has neighbors who have struggled with this. And yeah, I resonate with what you're saying about what can ordinary people like us, right, who have no knowledge about, these situations, and we find ourselves in these situations where we want to be compassionate and we want to help. What are best practices for, family members, friends, neighbors, and so forth? It's a really great point.
Yeah. One thing I just wanted to mention, I've talked to a
Yeah,
homeless
wrap
man
it
here
up
in
in
San
15
Diego.
seconds, Stacy.
Yeah. I talked to a man here in San Diego, and he pretty much, he was kicked out. He had some issues with his girlfriend and all that stuff. And he kept saying to me, I just need to get in touch with my friend. If I could talk to him, I know he'd help me out. So just, how do we figure out ways to get them reconnected with people that might be a good resource?
Yeah, yeah. Let's go to Shelby Frank. Shelby, go ahead and unmute yourself. And if you could turn your video on, if possible, we'd love to see you. But if not, we understand.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go for it. Do you
Okay.
have a question or an experience?
Both. So most of this is geared towards Corey, but also just a side note for Stacy. There is a resource out there called Miracle Messages, and they work with connecting people, sort of like a big brother, big sister type thing, or they also do try to track down family members if you're trying to look for someone specific that you want to reconnect with. So that might be something that you might want to look into. And then for Corey, I am from Wisconsin. I am a housing case manager. I work in a specific area called prevention and diversion. It's for people who are not literally homeless. We work with people that are doubled up, staying in hotels, paying for it by themselves, have received like a eviction notice, but have not yet lost their housing. So I'm wondering if maybe she has ever looked into a prevention and diversion program in her area that might be something that could really help her. And also if she has any goodwill programs near her. By us, we have lots of different counties that have goodwills in them, and they offer programs where they teach financial classes, they do employment, pre-employment, lots of different resources through there. So I just didn't know if she had anything that near her.
Thank you, Shelby. Go ahead, Corey.
So I didn't know that those types of programs even existed. It is something for me to look into, and I will definitely be looking into that, because something like that, where like my husband and I don't have substance abuse issues, we're both employed, we just need an opportunity to get somewhere better. That's it. And if a program like that, where we go in and say, hey, we both have jobs, we both, I'm in college, if something, prevention and diversion, right? I'll look
Yes.
into that. I definitely will look into that and see if
Perfect.
something comes up.
I hope it works for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shelby.
Yep.
We could go to Rosie. Rosie, go ahead and unmute yourself. Do you have an experience or a question you'd like to share?
It's a question, sort of directed at a few things that some people have said today. I'm based in LA, or I live in LA, based in LA. And I think like what Kat was saying about Seattle, it's one of those cities where a lot of people go when they become homeless, because in LA's case, maybe it's not so much access to services, but it's just good weather and it's easier to be out on the streets here. I had a friend who grew up homeless, is LGBT, and she worked with the LGBT center here. And she told me about how there something like 40% of the homeless youth here in LA are LGBT, and many of them have come from other parts of the country after being rejected by their families. So very kind of cut off from any community and any family. I also have some international development experience, and I can safely say that Skid Row and the encampments here in LA are worse than some of the informal settlements I've seen in like Africa, that you would think would be, the worst places in the world to be. But there was community. And here, I think maybe because of the number of people who come from other parts of the country, maybe because of, at least from my perspective, there seems to be very visible issues with mental illness and substance abuse, but there seems to be a complete lack of community. And so I say all this with like absolutely no judgment. I'm just sort of like, this is the impression that I'm getting. And to what Daniel was saying about NIMBYism and the need for us to pull together and create a community of care rather than a system of care, I guess I would just love to hear from anyone who has some thoughts on how to approach that in a city like this, where there is less of a sense of like, these are our neighbors. They're not necessarily from here. It's much, much harder to connect with them. Some people, you know, it's very hard to even have a conversation with them. So yeah, what do we do about that when people are kind of very, very cut off and very, very disempowered?
Great question, Rosie. Does one of our speakers want to address that? Daniel, do you have a perspective on that?
Yeah.
You go for it.
So I think the mantra that I would always say is, what can we do that's right in front of us? Like I said, the first thing that came to our mind was, let's work on trash. And that was something, when I asked someone in a homeless encampment, what would you like to do to improve the situation here? Let's pick up the trash. And then my first desire was then to create a community cleanup. And then that's what we did. If I walk into an encampment and I say, so what are your needs? Oh, we need some tents, because so-and-so just had their tent burned down, because that's what happens when we lack the safety and security, is that our belongings are always at risk. So what is it that we can find, and then be the person who can't, or not you necessarily, but create that community of care incrementally by finding out who has access to resources, how can we somehow facilitate that process, how can we be problem solvers, and then along the way, what you're doing is you're winning over people who lack the trust in us as supporters. So if because there is a lack of care in our community, so if we can create that sense of care, then what we then can do is empower folks to then be the givers of that care. I think it's very important for empowerment to ultimately be our goal, is that we don't need to do it. We can support the folks who can do it, because they have the neighborhood knowledge, the peer relationships, the cultural competencies to be able to do this work and not get burned out. And that's really important, is that can we be a small piece, each one of us, to create this community of care, not an individual on a mission, but those of us who can find an alignment in a common mission.
Thank you. I want to keep the conversation going here. I do want to go to Richard. I want to go to you now, Richard Aberdeen. I know that you, this is an issue dear to your heart. Go ahead and let's take it now 2 minutes. So a little bit less time, but go ahead in 2 minutes, an experience or a question that you want to share, Richard. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Richard.
There's a couple things. First of all, situation everywhere, I think, in the United States is rent is becoming untenable. Meaning people that work full time, sometimes both partners work full time, and they still can't afford rent. And something has to be done about this. And I don't know, nobody's doing anything about it. I don't hear the Democrats doing anything. I don't hear the Republicans doing anything. In our city of Nashville, they just passed a law, a statewide law, that there's no camping on government property, and you get a felony if you do. Now, what that essentially does is it says you're illegal to be homeless. And actually that violates a federal law, but I'm not sure that they care. So you have that kind of resistance from government. They don't want to help. They just want to burn the homeless into the ground and arrest them and put them in for-profit jails. And on the other side, we have a whole lot of people in Nashville that really care about the homeless and who really want to help the homeless. We have the largest homeless newspaper in Nashville in the world. And we have some of the artists here who have a celebrity name, have let their picture be taken and their bio put in the paper. So we do have a community that really cares on one side, and we have a government that not only doesn't care, they're absolutely hurting the homeless. What we can do as citizens is to, number one, don't ever vote for somebody if they don't have a track record of wanting to help the homeless and the poor.
Take 15 more seconds, Richard.
Just don't vote for them. And number two is anytime you see somebody in any kind of office, whether they're city council or state or federal, always ask the question, what do you plan to do to help the homeless? Because nobody's even asking them the question. You know, when they have their debates on national TV, CBS isn't asking them the question, neither is NPR.
All right.
They have to be grabbed by the jugular. They have to start saying, we want you to do something. And if you don't,
people have to speak up. Yeah.
Yeah.
The people have to speak up. I want to go to Annette. Annette, I know you've got experience with this as well. Do you have an experience you want to share, or do you want to ask a question?
Slight bit of both, actually. I hadn't really thought about having been homeless because in my mind, when I was living in Stockton, California, which is the pits, but as a addicted person, I think at the time it was heroin. It may have also been meth. I really don't remember. But point was, I was living with my partner. I considered it camping. So like for me, I didn't consider myself homeless. I was camping, which is bullshit because it was being homeless. But anyway, what I remember most was how dirty it was and how hard it was and how cold at the time. And it seems like if there were, because we knew people that were in like the tent city equivalent that were living close to the tracks in Stockton, California, and they had a whole community going on. And when I talk about community, I talk about people doing for other people and making sure that people had food or people knew where to go for this or that. And it seems to me if there were a place like that where they didn't get run off every 5 seconds, where there were porta-johns, running water of some sort that had like even the kind of showers you have at the beach where you could rinse off, and trash receptacles in exchange, is my thought, for community service. I'm wondering how that might look, because even when I was at my worst, I would have loved to have had a purpose. And if along with that, there were street outreach where people would come in once a day and have the resource information available, I'm wondering what kind of an impact that very little bit of help might be. I think that at that point in time, as disjointed as things were, as little brain power as I really seemed to have at the time, I think that would have caught my attention. You know, that I could have done something to get something. That's a concept that even anybody in a tent city does understand. And I think that could be a good beginning. I'm just wondering if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Let's actually just keep I want to get one more person to comment here before we transition out here to, we're going to move towards checkout here in just a moment. Anne, I want to invite you to go ahead. Is there an experience or a question that you had that you wanted to share?
I suppose it works kind of a combination. The house next door to me is now Section 8. They used to have their own program, but the last administration, all of that got consolidated into Section 8. So I've known a lot of people who've come through programs to get there. I sympathize with Corey, not wanting to take her kids into a homeless shelter, because a lot of people have come from homeless shelters. That's the stepping stone, but it's a horrible stepping stone to have to go through. What I've observed is that there's, I hate to use this word, but there's almost a toxic relationship among employment, housing, and transportation. That, okay, if you get a house and if you have a job, can you get between them? Does the timing work out? Can you get your kids? And I was wondering if anybody can comment on, is there a way to build up a safety net among those so that once people are established, they don't slip out?
Can I make a comment on that, David?
Yes, go ahead, Corey.
Well, Thank you for that. That you're one of very few people that has not criticized me for my choice to not put my kids through the trauma of being in a homeless shelter. I appreciate that very much. But my thought is there has to be communication. Without communication between the specific departments, and it really depends, you know, a lot of it comes down to a case by case basis. Where I live, I live in a city. Middletown is a city. So there is a public transportation line here. Um, I think if you could communicate, get local business owners together, along with the person responsible for the public transportation, put them before the city council and maybe have a meeting that way where maybe it can come up where, okay, we have people in these programs, you know, in transitional housing or whatever. How do we get them to where they need to be? You know, they need to get between jobs. Does it work out? I mean, and it takes communication between a lot of different people with a lot of different perspectives to come up with a common solution.
Yeah, thank you. We're gonna move to checkout in just a moment. We're gonna leave here at just about 30 minutes past the hour. But I wanted to, there's a, Apple Muncie has been putting a feedback form in the chat link. Please do copy and paste that chat link, that feedback form link, so that you can, it only takes a couple minutes to fill out after we end this call. Give us your feedback for this We the People's Forum and share ideas for topics that you'd like to see addressed in future We the People's Forums. And also, so We the People's Forum, this is an initiative of Braver Angels, and Kat Anderson, one of our speakers, just joined Braver Angels, I think last month or so. So Kat, just tell us why you joined and why you would encourage anyone else who's not a Braver Angels member to consider it.
Thank you, David. And thank you, David, for establishing this fine organization. The name, okay? I stumbled across this somehow in my adventures. Braver Angels. It's, you know, it just called to me. And then I had the privilege of going to a forum. And then there was so it was a win-win. It was free training on how to communicate with somebody who might differ in opinion or might have a different stance on an issue. And it was so invaluable to me. And then, of course, we have our We the People's Forums, debates. So I'd been exposed to some of that. I grew up in a household where I got to memorize part from childhood as well. And I tell you what, again, all of that, the education, the wonderful people, bringing community together. And guess what? I paid $12 for a year, and I can't get that kind of education anywhere else. And then, of course, it's called Braver Angels. So why wouldn't you?
Wonderful. Well, and so you can join, Kat, if you're not, go to braverangels.org and click join.
I love this organization.
Kat, you transitioned out a little bit there, but I think we got the message. And I would just want to encourage everyone to consider joining Kat if you're not already and becoming a member. And so we're now going to go to our checkout. We have Daniel Barth wants to share his contact information, I think, for anybody who wants to get in touch with him. So we will find a way to do that. But as we move to checkout here, I just want to ask a question. The question is, what are you taking away with you from this Braver Angels conversation? And we'll go to our four speakers last on that, but just in a sentence or so. And actually, Daniel, during that time, when I ask you to check out, you can share your contact information. Anyone, just raise your hand briefly in a sentence. What are you taking away with you from this Braver Angels conversation? Megan, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah. I was a social worker. So this is really the thing that I'm taking away, is that the system that I and my colleagues have worked in is not serving the people that we got into this field to serve.
Tanya, what are you taking away from this conversation? Tanya, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Oh, hi. Sorry about that. One thing for me as an organizer and a current social worker, and I'm mental health advocacy, is that I'm glad to see this conversation, which can be different for many different individuals, that we're finally having it collectively. And so one of my takeaways is that we're having the conversation now, and I'm hopeful that we'll continue to have it from many different aspects, and invite those that are currently experiencing the issue that we sometimes complain about to be a part of the solution. So that was my takeaway from it.
Yes, thank you, Tanya. Michael,
Absolutely.
What about you?
I want to share something. So my internship is at some place for my grad school, and I'm a social work intern. And I feel that the employees are not very good at this internship where I work at, because when my best friend was being homeless, I suggested that agency where I work at to help him. So I gave him the number, and I found out from him that the person watching him that they only helped male-aged people and not young people, when that agency actually helps people at all ages. I was told by my supervisor that they help people at all ages. I can't believe that the employee from the agency lied to my friend. It was a social worker that lied to my friend. So Michael, I feel that some social workers don't really want to help people, and I wonder why they're here if they don't want help.
Michael, thank you for sharing that, and I'm glad that you were here with us. Rita, what about you? What are you taking away from this conversation?
Well, I think that the question was answered for tonight's forum. Homelessness, one size does not fit all, for certain. I wanted to also mention, especially to Rosie Jewell, there is for people that are interested, in Austin, Texas, there is a community there that's being very successful with the homeless population, and it is called The Village. And one of our braver angels, actually one of our leadership, he is a supporter of this particular village, and his name is Steve Saltwick. And Steve would be very happy to speak to anyone about the village. But it's wonderful. There is a video available that shows you kind of how it's run, and I would highly recommend that. Once again, that's The Village, and it's Austin, Texas.
Great. Thank you, Rita. Sandy, and then we're going to go to our speakers and ask them. What are you taking away with you from this conversation?
Determination. I started out as a social caseworker. That's millennia ago. But I can see now why I'm drawn to Braver Angels. I believe that the skill sets that can be developed here individually and collectively can address this kind of an issue. It's not just an issue, it's an ecosystem of issues. I want to be able to facilitate bringing stakeholders together within a community, between communities, and even across the state, to share what is working and come up with creative solutions of what might work to address the very questions that have been asked of some of our friends here who have experienced homelessness. I myself am a senior citizen, and my husband and I have the good fortune to live in HUD subsidized housing. So we can live within $200 a month of our Social Security. So we're grateful for our solution. We lived in a 34-foot RV for 3 winters in the Carolinas. So that was as close as we came to homelessness, but this has been a godsend. And I want to find ways to contribute.
Thank you, Sandy. Stacy, I'll go to you quickly, though. Make it a quick sentence. What are you taking away with you from this conversation?
That there are tons of great people like all of you around the country, and I'd love to join more of these events so that I can share that back with our our nonprofits and the groups I work with here in San Diego. Thank you all for all your support and efforts and making me broadening my perspective. That's what I need, so that I can have a better perspective on how to tackle these issues and help more people.
Excellent. Daniel, let's go to you first, and feel free to share any contact information you wanted to. What are you taking with you from this conversation?
So I am just very heartened that across the country, with all these perspectives, that what is unifying us is so much bigger than what is different. So if there's one size, I think that is that we all seem to have somewhat of a clue as to what to do. And I'm very heartened with that. And my email address is my full name. If you want to contact me for whatever reason, Daniel Richard Barth. Daniel Richard Barth, one word, @gmail.com.
Excellent. And I just put that in the chat as well for people. Corey, what are you taking away with you from this conversation?
That there needs to be so much more conversation about it. It can't just be one conversation like this, and it's great. I love when we get to do these, but there needs to be more. More needs to be done, and it needs to be done as quickly as humanly possible.
Thank you. Let's go to Kat.
David, thank you so much. I am so heartened to see so many of us joining around the same topic with great ideas and great drive. And we always use it takes a village, and it truly does. And I'm just always overjoyed to see a group of folks across the nation, by the way, that have these great ideas and are willing to get their hands dirty. So thank you all.
And Cynthia, you get the last word.
Oh, cool. I appreciate that nobody got upset when I said we didn't really need to spend such a fortune on this giant industry that doesn't seem to help that much. But also, as I listened to particular Corey and other people discussion about all the places they have to go for help, and I think about my own town where every single agency that you might go to for help with housing or food stamps or whatever, they're all in different neighborhoods and they're a long way away. And if I had to go check and see if I was eligible for all of these, I'd probably spend a few weeks on a bus or more if I had to go back. And I think, well, why can't there be a kiosk in the Social Security where you can, Skype with someone in the Metropolitan Housing Authority, and when you go to the Job and Family Services, why can't you, and you get one thing there, why can't there be a kiosk where you can Skype with someone from some other agency so you can hit 2 or 3 agencies in a day and not spend your life on the bus?
Thank you, Cynthia. And actually, you don't get the last word, Cynthia. Darcy, you get the last word. What are you taking away from this conversation?
I totally agree with Corey. I just think this is the beginning. I think we need to keep having these conversations. And I like the idea of more collaboration with ideas. And, it's just a huge issue. And it just doesn't seem to, be getting solved anytime soon. I mean, there's just more and more people that don't have houses, and housing is getting, more and more expensive and out of reach. We really have to come up with solutions.
All right. And with that, let's go out there and build a house united. We'll see you next time here at We the People's Forum.